My name is Peter Shaw, and I'm interested in military modelling in the larger scales. This is a quarter-scale replica of a German King Tiger tank, which came out in 1944. It is made entirely of wood. The hull section's made out of half-inch birch plywood. The hull itself is fairly easy to make, being box-like in its construction, but the time is taken in all the detail work which goes on later. The camouflage pattern that I've put on this is known as the ambush pattern, which was used in the later stages of Normandy and on the Western Front, and is supposed to simulate falling leaves during the autumn. I've built many tanks over the years, starting in 1/10 scale and gradually working my way up through 1/8 until I came to 1/4, of which I've now built 5. The enthusiasm for quarter scale really ran out when I heard that 1/6 scale was being produced in America to some extent, and in working tanks coming out of Russia. So I've changed my scales in recent years to producing in that scale, which I find more acceptable from the point of view of storage and for moving them around, because tanks of this size are extremely heavy. The gun is named Dora. This is 1/16 scale. Prior to building this, I decided that we should have to build a model in 1/35 scale, which is quite a bit smaller, in order to ascertain whether the plans were accurate and exactly how the pieces actually fitted together. The model is about 13 feet long overall, which is the largest I could accommodate in my particular workshop. It was designed in 1937 by Krups with the intention of blasting its way through the Maginot Line. And unfortunately for the Germans, it wasn't ready in time for the 1940 Blitzkrieg, so it was only used for the first time at the siege of Sebastopol. The calibre of the gun is 80 centimetres. It had a penetration of 1 metre of armour steel. Or failing that, it could go through 7 metres of concrete or 30 metres of solid earth. In effect, it was a bit of a white elephant, in as much that the sheer scale of it being moved, deploying about 1,500 specialist artillery troops, made it inappropriate for local actions, and it was never used after Sebastopol, and was finally broken up in April 45 by the Germans and demolished into its component parts. Basically, the gun's been constructed out of half-inch birch ply for the main substructures. The bogies and the bolsters on the top were all made out of plywood. The bridging sections which go fore and aft on the gun, and the gun deck itself, all made out of ply. They were then sent to my friend Dave Tootle, who laboriously detailed them all. We have lots of little fittings made in cast in resin. The rail trucks themselves were quite complicated, as much as they had 80 wheels the whole set, and each one had to be put with its own suspension. Because of its size, it didn't have the long range of some of the smaller guns, but of course it was firing a much bigger shell and had much more destructive force at relatively shorter ranges. This is the largest model I've built so far. It's a half-scale model, 1:2, of a German Tiger tank. It's the early production model which first came out in early 1943, slightly modified as it went into battle in the Battle of Kursk in Russia in 1943. The track and wheels are all made of wood. This being the early version, the wheels would have had a rubber rim around the outside. The barrel I've constructed out of plastic drain pipe, clad with moulded ply to give the necessary diameter as it passes through the mantlet. Here we have the armoured position for the driver. This would close up when in action so that his view was extremely limited. Here we have the Bosch headlamp for night driving, and on the top deck we have various tools for specialist purposes. We have tow ropes for getting out of trouble. We have the wooden rods for cleaning the barrel, and on the side we have the special wire for pulling on fresh track should it be necessary to do so. On the turret we have the commander's cupola, which is the original version. They later modified this and at the same time removed the smoke discharges, which were found to be set off by rifle and small arms fire and creating a smoke screen when it's not wanted. The rear ventilation hatches were covered over with wire mesh at this stage to prevent tank hunter teams, particularly the Russians, from creeping up and placing hand grenades down into the ventilation chambers, which obviously did an awful lot of damage. Whilst I said my Tiger I model in half scale was the largest model I'd ever built, I consider this to be a replica which I have built in 1:1 scale, that is full size. It is made entirely out of wood and is a replica of the German half-track, the 250-1, and is painted in the livery of the Afrika Korps as used in the Desert War. The interior I have fitted out to reproduce the dashboard and gear change and steering position as best as possible. This is yet another full-scale replica that I've built. It took me about 2.5 months to build and is made entirely of wood. It represents the German Kettenkrad, which was a cross between a motorbike and a tracked vehicle. The driver sat in front here and steered the machine by turning the handlebars just as you would an ordinary motorbike. When it got beyond 5 degrees, the front wheel activated the brakes on the Caterpillar tracks and thereby turned the machine. It was very useful and was much prized as when captured by the Americans or the British during the Second World War. There's one last thing I'd like to show you, and this is a full-size replica of a German Panzer II Loops light reconnaissance tank. By the middle of the war, the Germans realised they needed something that was fast, lightly armoured and able to look after itself to do their reconnaissance work. So they adapted the Panzer II chassis, which by that stage had become obsolete, put torsion bar suspension in it, with a different turret armed with a 20mm gun, and the end result is what you see before you. It took me about 5 to 6 months to build, and is the last large project that I shall probably undertake. I've now returned to my 1:6 scale, which I find even more rewarding.